Scott Robohn, again, comes from Network Automation Forum. He is a NANOGer as well, but he is focused specifically now being a co-founder on network automation and how that can be enabled here. So as one of our peer organizations in the community, I'd like to give you a warm welcome for Scott and give him a thanks. He comes from us today from Harrisburg, Virginia. This is his first time speaking to us as a keynote, and I want to welcome him and give him all the benefits of being the first speaker up. Thank you. Good to see you, brother. Thanks.
I guess I should say I require no introduction, but I'm glad they worked it out. So, good morning. Thank you for being the early Monday crew here. Really appreciate you coming. I'm so pleased and honored to be here today to talk about what's going on in network automation and some of the community-related issues that we've seen in this sector. Let me tell you what I want to talk about. I'll give you a little bit of background first. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I'll describe myself as an internet plumber. My very first network automation project, I think, was in 1997, using expect to pull a set of routers that we weren't supposed to know what they were doing to get information. And you know, that's coming up on 28, 29 years now. So you know, we've all touched network automation in some form throughout our career. Some are more heavily involved in it than others. But I want to talk about community primarily today, how we come from networkers and we have different special interests. I want to talk about the question that motivated us to form Network Automation Forum. I'll tell you some answers that we've discovered, some initiatives that are coming out of those answers as a result, futures that we see for Network Automation Forum, and then I'm going to get personal and give you some final thoughts. So as far as the community is concerned, we're all networkers, right? If you're involved in NANOG, North American Network Operators Group, right? We're all involved in different areas of network engineering, network architecture, network operations of some form, all focused on different network technologies, and there are many, right? They've evolved over the years. It still seems like we've got plenty on our plate here. But if I peel this away, there's more detail, you know, under this layer of abstraction. We all self-organize into different organizations that focus on specific things. And this is not a comprehensive picture. Yes, I'm deliberately ripping off autonomous system peering paradigm here. I thought it was very appropriate. That's one of the ways I've been thinking about this for years. You know, we have NANOG, we have IETF, we have the NOGs, we have USNUA, we have Network Automation Forum. I'm not going to list everybody here because I'll leave too many out anyway. We all have things that we're very focused on, and there's overlap, right? And there are ways that we can figure out how to communicate between autonomous communities, you know, between our organizations, and cooperate through those peering relationships. That's certainly, you know, one of the things that's happening between NANOG and NAF. If I were to zero in and focus primarily on NANOG and NAF, there's a very easy distinction, right? NANOG is intentionally broad. You know, anything's in scope here from a networking perspective. NAF, by contrast, is narrow, right? We're intentionally focused on network automation issues. You're not going to see BGP workshops at a NAF event. You're not going to see some of those other, you know, more specific non-automation things there. But we catalyzed due to resistance around this specific technology. That kind of motivates the question that we'll get to in a little bit. So we felt that there was enough of an issue here to form a special interest group just focused on network automation. And interest in network automation isn't limited to NAF, right? If I give you a different view of the peering picture, you know, those little yellow boxes with N's in them for network automation, you know, any of these peer groups, there are people doing something or have some level of interest in network automation. So I don't want to portray that we have a lock on network automation. Obviously, people in all sorts of these organizations are doing different things and using network automation in different ways. We just provide one focal point to address the issues. So let me give you a little history on our origins, our connections to NANOG and how we got started. And let me start with, just tipping a hat to what NANOG has done in the community for years. This has been a place where so many of us have come, formed our own relationships, been able to collaborate on problems. Certainly Chris Grundeman and I, co-founders of NAF, have been involved in NANOG, for quite a long time. We all have those milestones for NANOG events. In particular, I think about as we came out of, the pandemic, the Minneapolis meeting and then the Austin meeting, and just saw the momentum pick back up, people being really, really interested in meeting together in person again. Those were pretty meaningful to me. Over the years, NANOG has created this catalog of super useful information, right? We all have our favorites, right? I will always go back to Richard Steenburgen on optical whenever I need to refresh, and that happens quite frequently. But I recommend those presentations. I just did a couple weeks ago to another group of young networkers, right? That's always going to be useful to me. Igor Giangrossi on 5G for IP network engineers, another one that's always going to be a go-to for me. Coming into 2022, I heard about the State of Network Automation survey that Chris Grundeman was putting together, and that caught my attention. And I thought, okay, I would really like to see the results of that survey. And then I said, scrap that, I'd rather talk with him and get his ideas and see what he's seeing. That started a conversation, some of those conversations happened here in person and with his presentations on the outcomes of that survey. And we started to ask each other, what is the specific resistance to network automation? What's the holdup? What's the attenuation? And we decided that we're only two people. We need more voices in the mix. So we decided to ask 350 of our best friends to start commenting on it. And as we validated the idea of a network automation specific meeting, we got very positive responses. So there was a clear desire to have automation focused content and community. And we got that started in late 2023. So we have some initial goals that we've started with. It's really very simple. We exist to support the adoption of network automation. And we use the forum term in network automation forum quite literally in the classic sense. Forum is a place for people to come and talk, right? And that's what we are, physically with in-person events and virtually through other means of online collaboration. We want to remain very open to providing a seat at the table for anyone interested in advancing network automation. And that includes all the usual suspects that you're familiar with. End users and implementers. They can be in enterprises, carriers, service providers, cloud providers, and more. Professional services, companies, vendors and solution providers, and anyone else sharing a common interest in advancing network automation. When we talk about the network automation community, that's anybody who's participating in network automation initiatives, whether it's in person or on Slack or other collab channels. Our organization is pretty lean. There's basically 3 of us involved, Chris, myself, and some other help, Emily, who's incredible at keeping us, reducing entropy. We've formed primarily around delivering events. So far we have a cadence of twice a year. Our next one is coming up in May in Prague. It's going to be fun. But we have collaboration channels in addition to the events. Again, Slack is very active. There's a lot of conversation and interesting initiatives that are going on there. I'll talk about them in a minute. In terms of sponsors, we're very, very open to having a seat. Anybody has a seat at the table, right? And we are always, concerned about, maybe sponsors trying to dominate an organization because they give financially. We haven't really encountered that, and we feel like we've had very good equal footing between all participants. That's really been extremely collaborative through all types of participants. So, the founding question, the driving question. Before I give you that question, let's just talk about automation a little bit. There's a sense in which automation happens, right? You don't need explicit efforts in some cases to see automation happen. Our industry, like many, if not all others, is based on leveraging various modes of automation to get things done. We want to use tools to be more efficient. There's an element to every human being that we're lazy and we don't want to work harder than we have to, right? We invented simple machines to move big rocks. We invented the spreadsheet, right? If you keep your books on paper anymore, come talk to me afterwards. We'll have a conversation about that. We've seen it in manufacturing, with the invention of the assembly line for repeatable, high-precision parts production. In telecom, we saw, the evolution of the switchboard and the switchboard operator, then moving to, mechanical switches and then electronic switches and so much more than that today. For all you ATM people, we went from PVCs to SVCs. Sorry, I had to work that in there. But even static routes versus routing protocols, right? We've all found ways to do things more automatically to make a system more resilient. So why this specific resistance to network automation? That drives basically our founding question. Why haven't we seen the full adoption of network automation yet? I'm going to give you some answers. They're not necessarily going to be all the definitive answers. So let me give you some specific examples. So from Terry Slattery, if you don't know Terry, Terry's been a networker for a long time, much longer than I have. I had the opportunity to work for him early in my career. He heard us talking about the idea of forming Network Automation Forum, and he said, I hear you asking the question, but not giving any answers. And at that point in time, he was not wrong. He said, I'd like to give you some answers. So we did a couple podcasts with Russ White, if you know Russ. That turned into a blog post, and that blog post is linked in that QR code there. And he boiled this down to 4 things. Basically, culture change is hard. That's the first answer he gave. And I think that all resonates with us, right? Anytime we have to make a sea change in how we do a thing, it takes effort to overcome that momentum. He cited the lack of adoption of network automation architectures. We often just we're writing scripts to automate individual things without the thought of what does a broader architecture look like. He also cited the failure to use a maturity model to figure out, okay, where am I as an organization in my ability to automate versus where I could go, where I should go. And then finally, that lack of commitment up and down the organizational stack, right? Does the leadership understand what we need to do here and what we're trying to do? So good set of initial answers, certainly not the full story. Chris, my friend and colleague, I love how he called this out. Basically, we identify as router jocks. Sorry, my term, not his. Do you remember the first time you heard the term router jock? It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I can make that router sing. That's a quote from a guy I used to work with a long time ago. And we've built identities around driving the CLI on our favorite platform. And I'm not going to avoid references here, but whether it's iOS or Junos or EOS or SROS or SR Linux, right? I know that CLI. And certainly certification programs have arisen on doing that thing, right? Show you're an expert in memorizing the commands. When that identity is challenged, many of us just retreat into a fortress. And we stop sharing information, right? No, that's my job, that's what I do. In a sense, the drive for network automation challenges that identity of being the person who drives the CLI on a box. We've seen this movie before. Industrial Revolution gives us lots of good examples there. But we need some explicit thought on collectively shifting our identity. What is our job? Is it just to be driving the CLI? Maybe we need to think a little bigger. Lots of good conversation around that. And that QR code gives you a link to his blog on this topic. I'm not going to leave myself out because I have opinions here. I'll go back to the 90s and look at the rapid evolution of the development of internet infrastructure. I was very lucky. I just kind of walked into that. I had a background in basically frustrated applied math, coming out of university, and kind of got hooked on this networking thing. And it was all self-study. It was all you figure it out and you do it. And that hero culture definitely emerged in large parts of that community early on. Being the hero, the one that can configure the switch, configure the router, troubleshoot the T1, et cetera. So that's kind of a corollary to the identity discussion that Chris called out. There's also that fear of automation. This is going to take my job, right? And that's always been an issue whenever we've seen automation come along in various forms in various industries. In particular, right now, AI is kind of pouring kerosene on that fire. Wow, now should I be really afraid? There's a lot of hype to that, but there is also actual impact, right? And we all need to be working in our organizations to kind of burn through the hype. Now, I'm going to give you one last example. And before I mentioned, we all have our favorite NANOG talks. Well, I'm not supposed to say that I have my favorite NAF talks in the spirit of, loving all my children equally, as it were. But one of my favorites was by Anna Claiborne of Zayo. At our last event, she did a keynote on this particular question. Why haven't we seen the full adoption of networking? And she gave an extremely thorough, well-researched answer to this. And that QR code will take you to her YouTube presentation on this. And she cites history, ecosystem, and perception as the main areas. From a history perspective, the telecom industry, we had to break it up intentionally, right? There was intentionally closed systems that I think in some real ways hindered innovation. To give them credit, they also are kind of the giants that on which the shoulders we stand, right? I know I just mangled that sentence, but you know what I mean. And that CLI-centric mode of operation really discouraged programmability, right? The human API, right? My fingers typing into the CLI. From an ecosystem perspective, the tools and systems early on tended to be very vendor locked, lacking early open source support, compared to automation of compute. That was much more fungible and much more automatable much earlier on. I'm not saying this is the continued state, and we'll address that in a bit. And from a perception perspective, networking's always kind of been viewed as this manual discipline, creating some resistance to doing things differently. And those tech advances in networking appear slower to move, slower to innovate. Well, I want to go back to the ecosystem. Anna really called out that limited virtual VC investment due to those small addressable markets. There hasn't been as much cash going in to fueling that ecosystem as well. She wrapped that up with, citing some continued barriers to network automation. She still sees vendor-driven limitations on programmability, or up till a very recent future. I believe that's changing. I think we're all seeing examples of that. She cited a dependence on proprietary hardware and software. Also very true for a long time, but open networking is bringing some interesting new discussions to that arena. There's still a persistent limited confidence from investors in networking as an area of innovation. You remember in the late 90s into the aughts, every new networking startup got absorbed by somebody, right? They just get swallowed up. So common themes, right? You can conclude from what you heard so far. The tech is not the hardest part, right? And notice this isn't a talk on, Python versus Rust versus Go and whatever's next from a scripting language. It's not a talk about orchestration. There are lots of important tool discussions, and you have some of them on the agenda here at NANOG 93. I was really encouraged to see that, as the agenda developed. Culture change is really hard, right? That's where we're focused. That's where we bring a lot of attention to, in addition to some of the tooling discussions. Think about the progression of invention of tools in networking and network automation. To rip off, quote, a friend of mine, Mike Bouchon, he puts it this way: we've invented 271 different automation tools. Do we believe that the 272nd tool will magically solve all the next problems? He's not wrong, right? There's no guarantee that that next tool is going to do it. But we want more innovation because maybe the 272nd or 273rd tool really will do something different, right? We want that innovation in the ecosystem. I'm not sure he said he put the number that high. I decided 271 for start. So we know that networking started without programmatic interfaces, really depended on the CLI and CLI-focused certifications. We have the identity issues of being that CLI-wielding network engineer. Should have brought a sword as a prop here. And that resistance to changing that identity. And then there's always that fear of change and displacement, right? These are not all the themes, all the answers, but this is kind of the sense of what we're dealing with driving up the hill here. So as a result of these conversations and challenges, we've got some initiatives happening in the Network Automation Forum that address pieces of this. The themes that we see emerging, there are people that are eager to embrace disruption, learning the new tools, right? And it's been, however long it's been in this talk, I have not said the word DevOps or net DevOps, right? But it is an increasingly software-centric world. And whether I embrace a movement like DevOps or whatever I label it, whatever's after DevOps, the whole idea of using software-centric tools to manage and operate my network just makes sense. Doesn't mean we all have to become programmers, but as the ecosystem grows and matures, we'll have more tools available to us to use those things. So people are eager, right? If you come to an event focused on network automation, it means you're willing to learn about things like that. And we're definitely seeing that. There's a whole conversation around source of truth for a network. Who'd have thought it, right? But what is, I don't want to say the golden config for the network, right? Because it has other implications. But how do I maintain the authoritative configuration information in my network? And how do I use that in automations and other operational issues? There's a big thread of conversation on that. There's a need to build a common vocabulary, interest in developing maturity model, the need for an automation framework, understanding the impact of AI. And I'll make it real simple. How does AI impact network automation? AI is just another form of automation. I know that's a big blanket statement, but that's totally in scope for what things we're talking about. How do I bridge the gap between the need for my custom scripts and putting them in production so people can use them repeatedly and reliably and not just stay on Scott's laptop? Don't worry, Scott's not responsible for maintaining the Python scriptorium. There's a lot of conversation on the interaction between open source and vendor tools and how they are used together to operate networks. And of course, with all the new forms of telemetry and observability, how do I use that to close that control loop for automation? How do I get beyond the firing the script that does the pre-upgrade router check, right? How do I string them together? How do I collect the feedback from the network to put this all together in an orchestrated manner? To address and work on some of these things, we have specific projects forming within NAF. We have what we call the AutoCon. That's a hat tip to either Neil Stephenson's book Cryptonomicon or the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. That's going to be our place for maintaining definitions of terms so we can understand what we're saying. There's a great network automation landscape document. I should have given you a QR code for that as well, by a gentleman named Steinze. And I'll speak it out here. If you go to steinze.com, steinzi.com, he's done a great job of doing that broad brush of all the different network automation tooling out there. It was one of the things I wanted NAF to develop early on, and he had the same idea completely separately, and he just did it. And it was like so awesome to see that emerge and see validation that that was a good idea. There is active work on a network automation framework document. There's a group of 30 to 40 people that are meeting every other week to hash through issues and come up with a good 1.0 document for this. We have a healthy birds of a feather community. One of the latest BOFs that's formed has been the network service provider BOF. We've had a lot of enterprise involvement and some service provider involvement. I think this helps show more service providers coming and willing to talk about their automation issues as well. There is strong interest in a vendor-independent certification for network automation and AI ops. A lot of talk, still needs more work. And this is not trivial, right? A lot of this needs to be done thoughtfully and carefully. Regarding these and other emerging efforts, we don't mandate them. This is people self-organizing to tackle these issues. And people vote with their feet, right? They decide they want to get involved, and those are the things that get addressed. What about futures for the organization? Well, let me restate the question, right? Why haven't we seen the full adoption of network automation yet? Did we answer the question? Yes and no, right? We have some answers, and we have some really good answers. You've seen that the answers are multifaceted. Our position is that there's value in persistently asking the question as long as there's still resistance to network automation as a technology, right? Maybe you can take this and apply it, in your organization. Why haven't we fully adopted network automation yet? Or what does a path look like for us to start where we are and make some progress? Again, we're all networkers, right? And we've been collaborating on issues across company lines, organization lines for decades. We have definite interest in building proactive collaboration between NAF, NANOG, and other orgs. And some of that's already happening from a grassroots perspective. Again, it doesn't need to be created or manufactured. Many people who are involved in NAF are involved in NANOG, right? The Venn diagram is a high degree of intersection there. We've had folks like Kat Gorinsky. Kat's here somewhere. It's too dark. I can't see the hair color, but Kat's a founding advisory board member for NAF and an AutoCon presenter, and of course on the NANOG board of directors. We've also done things to support IAB NEMOPS activity, Next Era of Network Management Operations, where in Toronto, at the previous NANOG, there was a information gathering session. And at our last NAF meeting, we also hosted an information gathering session. So these are very organic ways for us to come together and share information, turn it into something that IAB and IETF could actually do something with from a standards perspective. We don't see NAF as a standards organization in any way at this point. So we're very open to finding additional ways to collaborate. So while we're here this week, whether you're with NANOG or some other organization, you think there's some interesting problems we could tackle, let's talk, right? I of course, already am losing my voice here, but I'll do my best. I have my fisherman's friend cough drops that will help me through the rest of the week. So I'm serious. Let's find ways that make sense to collaborate, right? We don't have a lock on network automation in any way. So what's next for Network Automation Forum? We're pretty confident that network automation is not going away, right? It's only going to become more critical. AI is certainly an accelerator to that. And let me say that very carefully. I'm not here to hype AI, right? There's all the talk, right? But there are specific use cases where we see traction and we feel like part of our mission is how do we get to those very useful things that can lead to more repeatable processes in network operations. We're certainly of the mind with NANOG and others to help the community continue to engage and leverage the disruption that's coming at us. For the rest of this year, we'll have our 2 events. AutoCon 3 is in Prague, the last full week of May. On Wednesday night, I actually leave from Atlanta to go to Prague and do a site visit and make sure the Wi-Fi is going to be in tip-top shape, along with other site things I need to do. Back in the fall, we will be back in the US. Have not picked a venue yet. We've been in Denver a couple times. We love Denver. We're also opening up to other locations as well. We also have a NAFcast series that we're starting up for more very focused virtual conversations around network automation topics. If you're interested in that, let me know. As far as 2026 and beyond, who knows? Could there come a day when something like a network automation forum isn't needed anymore? It could, like if we see significant progress. Well, we're totally open to that future. I don't think it's going to be 2026, but who knows what we can do together on that front, and that all of us. Let me give you some final thoughts. This is where I'm going to get a little personal on you. This exercise has really been a lesson to me in the power of community, and let me expand on that. So I finally decided 2 years ago to leave corporate employment and start doing my own personal consulting work. And forming something like NAF was not on my radar. I just knew that I was ready to take my operator perspective and my vendor perspective and do something different with it. And I clearly remember on day 2 of resigning, having a very limited panic attack. I've always been part of a bigger organization. I've always really benefited from having colleagues and much smarter people than myself to collaborate with, which is not hard for me, by the way. And for whatever reason, I just had this thought that this is going to be okay. I'm just going to have to find different ways of building a team. And Network Automation Forum actually showed me that, wow, you can build teams in different ways across different company lines. And I should know that, right? From NANOG, from IETF, from other things that I've been involved with in the past. I have always reserved the idea of community to, geographic. This is my neighborhood, this is the community organization, or this is the religious organization I'm a part of. This has been a real education to me that community can be powerful even around a technology like network automation. That collaboration is part of what got the internet working and still keeps it working today. If you think about all the inter-exchange people that who are trying to build another IX somewhere for better connectivity for a region, there are people giving their time to do this. And that way to build community has just been an eye-opening experience for me. So thank you for letting me say that. How to participate in NAF. We would welcome anybody who can sign up to that cause, advancing the adoption of network automation. Come and be a part of the conversation. We're networkautomation.forum. You can check us out there. Our Slack's open to all. You don't ever have to attend an in-person event. Come in, lurk, see what you think. Jump in when you have information to share. We're also pretty active on LinkedIn. We also maintain an email list. The AutoCon materials are available on YouTube, no restriction. I should have put that QR code up there too. My apologies for that. If you want to make a difference, if you want to move the ball down the field, pick your favorite sports ball analogy, come on in, pull up a chair. There's a room for you in the conversation. With that, do you have any questions? Does Steve have a question?
I'm just happy you're here to do this. When you get the mic, please, your name and your company affiliation, please.
Yep.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Darren Carrick, Quad 9. With my previous affiliation, I'd push for network automation, and when your management says, we're completely behind automation, but yet, there's a lack of resources or a lack of follow-through, And years later they go, "Where's the automation?" You go, "Well, I can't do automation part-time." How would you sell this to upper management? I had pushed for having a staff network automation engineer who you could just point at and say, "We need to automate this." Just what would be your approach to selling this concept that everybody says we absolutely need?
So it's a great question. There's been a little conversation around this within NAF, and I feel the momentum building for it. I'm actually working on a blog post on this right now. But to give you the short version, there's the automation happens discussion. The tooling ecosystem is there. Why not take advantage of it? You're going to have much more success getting people with software skills and networking skills every additional year out of school. Why not make things more efficient and more resilient in your operation? The thing that's missing there is a really good approach to calculating ROI to make an impact on business decision makers that want to see a return on their investment. And I would love to see more engagement on that particular issue.
Great, thank you. I look forward to your blog post.
Thank you.
Randy and Cisco. Scott, nice insight about automation. One of the things I noticed that not on your list is TM Forum, and they are driving autonomous networking and other things. And it appears that there's less traction on the American side, on the North American side. So I'd like to hear your insights, your thoughts on that.
Are you involved in TM Forum?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk. Seriously, again, my list of autonomous communities, I knew I would be missing some. I would love to hear what's happening there and what would make sense.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm easy buy with a coffee, which is free here anyway. So.
Mahesh Jetanandani, Arcus. I just wanted to provide a comment and say thank you, first of all, for having a forum for discussion around network automation. And I would really look forward to moving the discussion forward, both on Slack and in the forum, for how we want to get there. Thank you.
Great.
Michael Costello, no corporate affiliation. I'm wondering how you think about network automation from a doing things that I do manually faster, and fundamentally thinking about how to more programmatically or formally model, build, operate networks. The idea of, are we building faster horses or are we building cars?
So great analogy. They both influence each other, right? You can start with, okay, here's a manual operation that I want to automate. And that's not a bad place to start. But in many examples, the new tooling that I bring to the table can actually change the way I do a thing. The instantiation of the assembly line was one huge example of that. I can't give you great examples off the top of my head here. I will say that you need to go in with that attitude. Hey, this might change how I do things, and I need to be very, very open to realizing that maybe this manual way wasn't the way to do it. And speeding up the horse versus making a car, it gives me different options.
Thank you, Scott.
Hi, good morning. Menken Davidson, Blue Cross, North Carolina. I will keep my questions brief and to the point. I apologize. My question kind of got eaten by the previous one. I'm trying to figure out if I can reframe it real quickly. But
Sure.
When you were talking earlier about identity and culture change, I'm curious if the discussions the discussions up to this point, has the subject of ownership of design and kind of art versus science and has the concept of the change in mindset between the kind of individual owner of a design and the bespoke kind of artisanal model versus the assembly line we were talking about. By the way, I thought of a great extension for that analogy, and that is try building a horse with an assembly line.
Sure.
It obviously wouldn't work. But I'm curious if in the discussion of culture change, that change in mindset in terms of individual ownership of design, at the time of delivery has come up.
So it comes up in different ways, perhaps not that directly. People as individuals are always going to solve spot problems, right? So we don't want to squelch that, but we want to create a culture where, okay, that script that does this can be used by many others very easily. And that has to be deliberate. It has to be process-driven. There's responsibility on leadership to get it and promote that culture. I've also thought in terms, too, of like having an operations architect that has that responsibility, like for making sure these automations work together and are accessible by everybody who needs to use them, but also working upstream with network architecture folks to keep that in mind from the start. Don't just go out with the intent to implement the latest variant of MPLS, for example. Always have in mind, how do I make this operational, easy to troubleshoot, and make that as high a criteria as getting a new protocol implemented. It's a longer conversation. It's a good question.
The last gentleman said thank you.
Thank you.
Colin Constable from AdSign, and it's great to see you up on the main stage, Scott. I think it's awesome to see you up there. I want you to just talk about a problem that you and I have faced in the past, which is I've always been keen on working really, really hard to be lazy. And that often means that I need tools on routers and switches and devices. And there's always a battle of trying to get my tool on a router or tool devices. Because it's, I want the latest and greatest, and nobody wants the latest and greatest on their router or switch because reasons.
Right.
And there's a balance there, but how do you strike the balance, and how do you get the latest and greatest tools on equipment so you can actually manage them and make them much more autonomous?
The pause means I'm thinking.
That's good. I like you thinking. That's good.
So I would say, let me ask you back.
Yeah.
It does feel like that dam is cracking a little.
I'm hoping that's the case. I'm starting to see containerization onto devices,
Sure.
which I think is freaking awesome, and I want to see more of that. But there seems to be some sort of firewall between the network engineers in the field, like you and me,
Right.
and the network engineers that are trying to build switches and routers and other bits of equipment, and they just like hands off, you're not having any random code on my stuff.
So I would point to and encourage you and all of us to leverage the following. Like, we have instances of modern operating systems that now have more well-documented and accessible APIs that I can do a lot more than just via the CLI. I want to be very careful to not drop into vendor endorsement mode. But there is at least one example of a modern operating system that can call out to ChatGPT. And so that shows a increased willingness to do other things that are not native on the box. I would also throw the whole open networking equation out there to you, where there's more and more interest in taking an open source operating system like Sonic that I could take it and do my own things with, like work with Colin to get these other agents on the box. So maybe not a great complete answer to your question, but again, there's more openness to it than I think there was even 3 years ago.
No, that's good. I'll come join you and rally the crowds around that.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you so much, Scott.
Yeah.
Thomas King from DKIX. Great presentation, thank you. If you look at network automation, from my point of view, there are two areas. The network automation within a network and the network automation across different network boundaries. You just gave an overview from my perspective, mainly focusing on automation within a network. And, there are challenges. I completely agree, but we already did see a lot of improvements. However, if we look in the area of network automation between network boundaries, from my perspective, that's a different picture. So I have two questions for you. Do you agree? And why is it like this?
So number one, definitely agree. Number two, I have a hard enough time with everything that's under my control. But let me give you a little hope. I can now make international calls across the world, across autonomous network boundaries, not in the BGP sense, but in different telcos. Like we figured out how to share the signaling interfaces across, hey, this network isn't under my control and I'm not sure I can trust it. There's hope. There's going to be ways to do this. I just haven't thought about that bigger picture that much yet. Let's talk more. Last question.
Hi, Barbara Fox from Siena. I'm really interested in the source of truth, right? So I always think of the network as the source of truth. Do you envision there being different sources of truth for different automation tools, or how do you work with that?
That's a great question. I would lean toward however you view source of truth, whether it's in a centralized place or distributed, there should be one.
Okay.
And maybe calling it source of truth is part of the problem. Like, I like the idea of calling it authoritative configuration information. That might be in a distributed repository. So let's talk more for sure. I don't want to steal time from the next presenters. Okay. Thank you very much.
Ready? Scott, thank you again for a fabulous talk and overview on that. Really, really important. Again, you too. Thank you so much.